While they may not be the most famous or the most impressive, the villains in Disney's direct-to-DVD sequels are still memorable. Sometimes they can be fun and even pretty powerful, to the point where they're about on the level of their Disney canon counterparts. So, who has risen high enough to be the most powerful baddie on the small screen, and who's still considered to be a minor threat? Hey everybody, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney sequel villains, weak to powerful. Before we begin, we've got one quick rule. Because we're focusing on Disney's direct-to-DVD sequels, with a couple of theatrical exceptions, we aren't going to be including any canon original villains, so no Jafar, no Lady Tremaine, no Cruella de Vil. With that being said, let's get to the ranking. Naturally, we're going to be starting with our weakest villains before working our way up to the most powerful and threatening. Ironically, our weakest villain was also considered to be our least bad villain in our original Disney sequel villains video. Starting the list is Little Lightning from Patch's London Adventure. Obviously, Lightning isn't the strongest pup, being a super tiny and not very athletic corgi. That's not to say he's completely out of shape or anything like that, he's just not much of a fighter or a threat.
If you went out and did something heroic.
Really, the only advantage he has is his ability to scheme, as we see him trying to convince Thunderbolt that the producers of their show were going to replace him. But even then, you could argue that Thunderbolt wasn't exactly hard to trick. So even then, his scheming skills aren't too impressive, at least not when compared to the rest of the villains on this list. Next is Abis. Oh hey, look at that, another Jason Alexander character. They sure did get him for a lot of these things. Anyway, while not the main baddie of The Return of Jafar, Abis does kickstart the film's conflict by being the one to find Jafar's lamp. Although he can be merciless as a villain, he can also be clueless and immature, as we see throughout the second Aladdin film, as well as in the Aladdin TV series. As the leader of an Arabian gang, Abis relies on them to fight instead of relying on his own swordsmanship. Adding insult to injury is that most of the other criminals he works with are smarter and more competent. Even when he does have a really good idea, it's common to see him ruin these plans for himself. Talk about self-sabotage. Abis tries to leverage power against Jafar by keeping a hold of the third wish. It doesn't go well. All in all, Abis is fairly memorable but not all that special in terms of power. Then again, when his name is literally abysmal, it's not all that unexpected. Next, we have Buster from Lady and the Tramp 2. Buster is the leader of the Junkyard Dogs, and thus is implied to be the strongest of the bunch. This is also inferred by his breed. After all, Dobermans are known for being strong and intimidating. However, because of his beliefs, Buster comes off as petty and easily prone to jealousy. Like Little Lightning, Buster is a schemer, given that his whole plan was to get revenge on Tramp by using Scamp. But again, it all comes down to the person he's trying to trick, and needless to say, it's easy to trick a little puppy. At the end of the film, Scamp manages to trap Buster underneath a pile of junk, with Buster being unable to get out without any help. So maybe his strength isn't all it's cracked up to be. Additionally, his fellow Junkyard Dogs don't seem to have much loyalty, ditching Buster at the end. So much for having allies.
If you dogs leave, you're never coming back!
With no one to rely on other than himself, Buster falls far behind the rest of our villainous pack. Next, we have the third Little Mermaid's Marlena Del Rey. Instead of being a sorceress or someone looking to completely take over Atlantica, Marlena is simply a governess to King Triton's daughters. Essentially, she's a glorified nanny. She wishes to outrank Sebastian, but even when she briefly gets the title of Chief of Palace Staff, that doesn't amount to much actual power. Additionally, while she may be a schemer, Marlena doesn't have any magic or extraordinary abilities, unless you want to count her ability to stylize as extraordinary. She does try to fight people, but she still needs to use outside resources to boost her own strength. Simply put, Marlena is far from Ursula's level, both in terms of power and memorability. Next is the circus owner and thief, Sarousch. Certainly one of the least popular Disney sequel villains, and for good reason. But since this is a ranking based on power, we won't spend too much time roasting him on his vanity and complete lack of intimidation. Anyway, Sarousch is both a circus ringmaster and a master thief, using his circus as a cover to steal famous treasures and riches. He's manipulative, though this only applies to his assistant, Madeline, and Phoebus, who he briefly tricks into thinking that Madeline is behind all the thefts. With the whole circus crew at his disposal, Sarousch is able to steal some pretty big items, like a giant bell from Notre Dame. He's also smart enough to plan ahead, kidnapping both Zephyr and Jolly to use as leverage. But while we will acknowledge that he's technically smarter than some of the other villains we've listed so far, the fact that he's defeated so easily in the end shows that this guy is mostly all talk and doesn't have much personal strength. He can be sneaky and manipulative, but the moment he's outnumbered, it's game over. Next is Extremely Goofy Movie's Bradley Uppercrust III. We finally reached our first sequel villain with some significant status. Given the way he dresses, acts, and the fact that he's the head of the Gamma Mu Mu school fraternity, Bradley very much comes off as the legacy type of student, the type of person who's able to get into a prestigious school based on money and name alone.
I'm sorry, I...
As a fraternity leader, he's got plenty of henchmen to help with his cheating and back him up in any fight, although most of these guys either disappear or turn against Bradley, so we'll only give him a half point for his crew. Adding to that, while Bradley isn't as skilled as Max, he's still a decent athlete. Not bad for such a scrawny-looking guy. In addition to his influence and physical skills, Bradley is also a master manipulator and a successful schemer. Prior to the X Games competition with Max, Bradley and his team were able to get away with cheating at least 4 separate times, using a variety of plans and gadgets. While these things couldn't completely save him, he was extremely close to victory, more so than any of the villains we've named so far. So Bradley earned himself a decent spot on our list. Next is Australian poacher Percival mcleach. Being a man who's only interested in catching and selling animals for profit, mcleach has a variety of useful skills, from tracking and hunting to using various dangerous weapons like rifles, knives, double-barrel shotguns, and bushwhackers. When he really needs to threaten someone, he's also got a small collection of hungry man-eating crocodiles. Speaking of which, while it still takes the sight of a giant waterfall to make them back off, mcleach is still able to fend the crocodiles off long enough to avoid getting bitten or eaten by them. Definitely impressive. Although he claims that he never studied past the 3rd grade, mcleach is also a master at coming up with effective lies, allowing him to trick Cody into leading him to the eagle and her eggs. In what is admittedly a great plan to get the authorities off his tail, mcleach also takes the time to throw Cody's backpack into the water, making it look like he's already been eaten. Between his hunting skills, his physical strength, and his weaponry, mcleach is much more than a simple poacher. Next is Frozen 2's King Runard. While he only had a couple of scenes, his status as a former king pretty much forced us to give him a fairly high spot. For some villains, status, and how it's utilized, is key in terms of how they're able to influence others and build their own sense of power. However, Runard's royal status is pretty much his only real significant note of power. Part of this is simply due to a small amount of screen time, but even in the scenes he's in, we have to say that we aren't exactly impressed. Sure, he came up with the whole betray the Northuldra people plan, but all that amounted to was just stabbing the leader in the back when he wasn't looking. Not something that took a ton of planning or thought. Furthermore, while the rest of his men were able to survive the attack of both the Northuldra people and the Spears of the Forest, Runard wasn't so lucky, dying in the attack.
They were attacking us.
From that, we can guess that he wasn't very strong or skilled when it came to fighting. If we have to give Runard credit for anything, it's the fact that he was able to figure out how to weaken the spirits of the forest as well as the Northuldra people using a dam. While this was clever, in a super evil way, we felt that we just couldn't put him any higher based on all his other weaknesses. Let's take a dip in the ocean for our next entry, Ursula's crazy sister, Morgana. Like her sister, Morgana is a sorceress who's been exiled from Atlantica for trying to usurp King Triton and for threatening his granddaughter, Melody. Being much skinnier than her sister, Morgana is incredibly fast with long and fairly strong tentacles to boot, which is what allows her to briefly kidnap a baby Melody in the first place. We also see how she's a bit of an escape artist, easily avoiding being captured by Triton's guards. Unfortunately, this is where Morgana's impressive feats end. When it comes to their magical skills, Ursula and Morgana just can't be compared. While she knows how to mix potions that aren't nearly as powerful or as successful as her sisters, she even has to use a potion that was created by Ursula to change Melody into a mermaid. She does briefly become more powerful when she's given Triton's trident, but since she doesn't keep the weapon and is defenseless against it when Triton finally gets it back, we're not going to count it in our ranking. We will say, however, that Morgana is yet again another fairly skilled manipulator, though we'd argue that Melody's somewhat dysfunctional relationship with her mother played a big part in that manipulation being so successful. While we may feel sorry for Morgana being stuck in Ursula's shadow, we can't deny the facts, but we can still give her a spot in the upper half of our list. Next is Tarzan 2's Mama Gunda. Mama Gunda is the mother of two huge gorillas. She isn't the evilest antagonist around, but she may just be one of the strongest. Well, sure, she may not look like much due to her height, but she's still a gorilla, which, let us remind you, is a strong animal. She's even able to go toe-to-toe with Zugor when they fight each other towards the end. What puts Mama this high are her sons. Both Udo and Kago are two of the biggest gorillas we've seen in the Tarzan franchise, potentially dwarfing even Kerchak. They also have pretty impressive amounts of stamina, to the point where they can just smash rocks for hours on end, further adding to how tough they can be to fight head-on. But while they are extremely powerful when it comes to their physical strength, they aren't the brightest bananas in the bunch, which is why they need their mother to give them orders and tell them what to do.
Out of the way, twerp!
If it weren't for her sons being so loyal, we doubt Mama would have made it this high. As it stands, however, it's safe to say that this is one Mama you don't want to mess with, although there is still one animal villain that outranks her. Entering our top 5 is Erik Hellstrom. No, he's not an actual god, though he does have a pretty rad godlike name. Featured in the final part of Atlantis, Milos' adventure, Erik is on the older side, and unfortunately for him, his mind hasn't exactly aged gracefully. This madness also partially came from the loss of his company and all his money. So in other words, he doesn't have much of a status these days. What he does have, however, is an ancient spear called the Gungnir, one of the many old artifacts from Atlantis. Using the spear, Erik awakens two ancient demons, the Surtur, the Chaos Lord of Fire, and Ymir, the Chaos Lord of Ice. You'd think having a couple of demons on your side would give you a pretty big power boost. And to be fair, it does take a lot to finally take them down, but the fact that it only takes dropping some land on them to defeat them means that they aren't invulnerable or even super durable. Erik also loses a spear in the end, once again leaving him with absolutely nothing. Still, for a time, he was almost a god, and we have to give him some credit. Just outside the podium of power, we have the follow-up to Scar, Zira. While Scar may have had an army of hyenas, Zira had a team of lionesses by her side for most of the film. Now, we say most because she does lose her support in the end. Still, even without her fellow lionesses, Zira is fierce and shouldn't be taken lightly. Like most lions, she's strong, fast, comes with killer claws, and has a keen eye when it comes to hunting. We don't see her fight too often, but her status as leader to the outsiders indicates that she must be the strongest of the bunch. She's also a great strategist and a total manipulator when it comes to her kids. Really, if not for Kira, Kovu, and the power of love, Zira could have gotten the war she wanted, and she might have won.
Once he has Simba alone.
We can't give her the top spot since she loses a huge chunk of her power, but we can certainly call her the most powerful Disney sequel animal character. The Bronze Medal of Power goes to the musical mastermind, Maestro Forte. Between his uncanny CGI face and his Tim Curry vocal performance, Forte is an unforgettable villain. Luckily for this Maestro, when it comes to his power level, he seems to do pretty well in that category. Although he's bolted to the wall and can't exactly move around or leave the room he's stuck in, Forte manages to be an active villain. Through his enchantingly haunting songs and the trippy imagery that comes with them, he's able to sway the beast's feelings and thoughts, being arguably the most notable manipulator on our list. He's a schemer, and he refuses to give up even when it's made clear that the beast will choose Belle over him. This is where Forte's final ability comes into play. With his extremely loud music, he nearly brings down the entire castle, which would have killed everyone, including himself, which he doesn't even care about. If not for the beast being physically stronger and, having actual limbs, the story of Beauty and the Beast would have had a bummer of an ending. The Silver Medal of Power goes to Saluk from the third Aladdin movie. Saluk is a ruthless, violent, and rather impatient thug who takes a sadistic pleasure in killing those he deems weak. Needless to say, even without any sort of magic powers or abilities, Saluk can still be threatening. He's got an impressive amount of physical strength to the point where Aladdin is forced to outsmart him and use the Hand of Midas to defeat him. He's even strong enough to kill a shark with his bare hands. But that's not to say that Saluk is more brawn than brains. He can be pretty sneaky and clever, easily usurping Kazim as the leader of the 40 Thieves.
I
shall be the one to test him.
We also can't forget the small handful of allied thieves he keeps on his side, despite him betraying the rest of the gang, showing that he still has the power of numbers on his side, something characters like Buster or Bradley don't have by the end of their respective films. But with all these strengths, who could be even more powerful than Saluk? Finally, the gold medal of power goes to Arthur from Ralph Breaks the Internet. While not exactly a character in the traditional sense, it's still the main villain, or rather, as close as you can get to having a main villain.
Insecurity detected.
Created by the dark web's Double Dan, Arthur is an insecurity virus created to spread infections around the internet. Its ability to detect insecurities is impeccable, being not limited to just the physical composition of the target, but also emotional insecurities, as we see when it scans Ralph's grief over ruining his friendship with Vanellope. All he needs is one scan, and he can destabilize not only entire games and servers, but potentially the entire internet. But beyond these powerful abilities, what truly puts Arthur at the top of the list is the simple fact that Arthur is the only Disney sequel villain who doesn't get defeated or killed at the end of the movie. We never actually see what happened to Arthur, which means that he could still be out there on the internet somewhere, lying in wait and looking for more insecurities to spread. For these reasons, we had to give Arthur our gold medal of power. Alright guys, that's it. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge our Weak to Powerful playlist, where we break down who the most powerful characters are in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.